We all think we can process loss, but what if grief is silently building inside, shaping every part of your life?
Sometimes it's been helpful to model loss as being something that's going to be forever. Grief is short-term. And sometimes people are scared that this is just what they're going to feel like forever. It should be big right now. It won't always be.
In this episode, we uncover the invisible struggles men face with repression and the unconventional ways people cope with the unbearable.
When we sit on the ground as men, often we're coming to these sacred times of songs and stories, and as you give room over a course of a night or days, it's like a metaphysical thing that takes place, and you end up sharing each other's grief.
Discover how grief isn't just sadness. It's a force that can break you or transform you.
Somebody who's just going about their life and then one day their person is gone. What that does to someone's nervous system, if somebody's going to make it through the long haul of something like this, their emotional regulations needs to be somewhat intact, but also their ability to lean on their community, because that's the only thing that really helps.
Have you ever wondered what masculinity even is in the modern era? Are you ready to move beyond the macho bully or the soy boy archetypes? I'm Marc Azoulay, and this is the Men's Therapy Podcast. Together, we'll explore how neuroscience, Jungian psychology, and Buddhist philosophy can transform your life, your marriage, and your business. Are you ready to deep dive into the minds of men? Let's begin. Hello, welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Marc Azoulay, and today we're doing another episode. This time it is on grief and mourning. So it's pretty topical. Today is actually September 11th, day that we're recording, which was a big day of grief and mourning for America, for my country. And also I'm on the back of a school shooting that happened in my small town in Evergreen, Colorado yesterday. So I'm particularly feeling it, as is my community. So I think this has the power to be a really powerful conversation with everybody here. So we have a couple returning guests and a brand new one. So if you all want to start by introducing yourself, say a little bit about, who you are and how grief shows up in your practice. Jack, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So sorry again, Mark, about what happened. I think it's a topical thing for us to talk about, especially, recovering from grief, stalemating from it. But I have a private practice here in New York City. I work with the LGBTQ folks as well as with substance use and general psychotherapy. Grief, I would say, predominantly came up in my practice from a lot of people reaching out, just saying that they weren't finding people who were specializing in grief and wanted to really have conversations specifically about that. So I think I did more training simply because it was coming up in ways where people wanted specialized, specific discussion around grief, besides just saying it is a sadness or it's a emotion to be processed. I think people really wanted something specific to talk about it, or a drive to put it somewhere. So I wrote in my blog post for this month kind of about something that had come up because of that. But I think in a lot of ways it does come up specifically with men as something that does get repressed and then comes out in different ways and eventually, is found if it's not something that specifically is being sought out treatment for.
Great. Well, welcome back. You've been a regular guest on these. It's always great to have your voice.
Thank you.
Dr. King, how about yourself?
I'm based in Texas, and I work in anti-human trafficking and trauma recovery. It's an interesting day, as you said, like with the assassination of Charlie Kirk yesterday, the shooting up there. This morning I've been on back-to-back podcasts and phone calls, all dealing with a lot of the grief I see comes out of anger, and, disappointment arises out of unmet expectations. So grieving is often associated with the loss of a person, but it can also be the loss of a movement, the loss of an opportunity, the loss of a partner in terms of a marriage relationship. So there's a range of things that I often find that men articulate with different levels of effectiveness that we lump together and call it grief.
Yeah, a lot of stuff happened in these last couple of days, man. It's
been a big couple of days, mate.
A big couple of days, yeah. And Ben, you're up.
Yeah. So my physical office is in Lafayette, Colorado, East Boulder County. And I work remotely with folks in a bunch of other states: Utah, Washington, Vermont, Montana, Massachusetts. They're all places that I've been a lover of the outdoors and in the mountains, skiing, climbing, being in the mountains, things like that for a long time. And And so my practice has a lot of people who are similarly minded. So a lot of people like that live here in Boulder County, and by virtue of that, these are risky activities. I guess you would say I came into working with grief organically and maybe somewhat begrudgingly. It just happened. It happens to people who I work with. And so a bunch of years ago, the American Alpine Club started a philanthropic arm where they give grants for people who just lost somebody in a mountain-related accident. And having been a group therapist for a long time, I started a group that's been ongoing for about 4 years now that focuses on that and has people who are varying relationship to having lost somebody in an avalanche or a rock fall, nearing things like that. And yeah, that has been my training, and it has been intense and really, really meaningful. And I've learned a lot from those folks. Yeah, it's become a really, unfortunately, really central part of my practice because it happens frequently out here.
So I want to start off by opening the conversation of, what in your mind differentiates grief from sadness? I think you're all talking about how this is a different thing. This is a deeper thing. And I know for me, my training in kind of typical therapy school didn't really go that much into it. We learned about the stages of grief. And they're like, go ahead, go, do it. But there's so much more to it. So, as we're opening up a conversation, like, how would you define grief? How does it kind of differ from, like you said, sadness or depression or numbness? What is grief?
I mean, I think, John, you made a good point of saying, like, it's an amalgamation of all these different things that are kind of coming together and, sitting on your chest or being in your body in a certain way. But I think, Mark, you're bringing up the stages of grief too. I always have clients coming in saying, oh, I thought I was past this stage, or when is this stage going to come? Or, kind of talking, because I think that's so colloquially something that people can grasp onto, is that there are these, set stages, but it's not really discussed that stages can look different. You can bounce between stages. You can, go for 4 months thinking that you're, out of grief, and then a stage can come up. So maybe a continuum is a better way of looking at it rather than stages, but it is a bunch of different feelings that overwhelm, I think, some people to the point where it can feel like a numbness or just a complete emptiness. And part of the work is just trying to name what those emotions are for people, because it just simply can be different person to person. I have a client who experiences tremendous amounts of guilt, within his grief. And I have another client who experiences tremendous amounts of anger, or sometimes it is tremendous amounts of sadness, but it is that with other things always. So if ever it feels, I guess, like sadness is not the right word to describe it, it doesn't feel like enough, usually, I would say, oh, we're probably talking about something grief related,
Yeah, I have similar thoughts on it. You mentioned the 5 stages. I think I threw it under the bus a little bit in my blog post. It's quite intentionally. I mean, I kind of get tired of hearing about. I roll my eyes a little bit whenever I'm like, are we really still there? That's how we're talking about this, because so many. I mean, it's not like it's an uncommon experience for somebody to die and people around them to be affected by it. Even though, John, I agree with you, it's not always death. There's lots of other ways and things that can stimulate a grief process. But it's so much messier than that. And even comparing grief, or like, it's my first thought when you said that, Mark, was like, it's curious to even, I guess it makes sense in a way that there would be sadness associated with grief, but grief is not even like it's not a singular emotion at all in my mind. And sadness being one of just this endless, and it's not even 5 stages. It's like, there's just whatever your relationship was with whatever you lost and whoever you were leading up to it. And it's just, there's no end to the number of unique factors that could contribute to whatever the hell somebody goes through, after a loss. It's just, it's immensely complicated.
So I'm curious, I think, Jack, you were talking about this a little bit during your intro, that men really repress grief. I think as men we're told not to feel that, or that it's a failure. I think for a lot of guys I work with, it comes with a lot of shame. We're born to be protectors and fixers. And a lot of times grief is the, humble acceptance that we couldn't protect something, right? Or we couldn't fix something, right? Something was lost or something broke irreparably. And I find for a lot of my guys, like, unprocessed grief is often the root of addictive behaviors, relationship failures, trouble with their children. So I want to open up to the group. Like, how does grief show up in men? What do you see with kind of the social conditioning around it? What kind of aspects of it do we struggle with? And how can men start to get in touch with that grief?
That's good, mate. For me, I find it shows up a lot with guys with shame. You unpack it with them, and they're overwhelmed with a sense of shame and guilt because they didn't make the phone call when they felt they should have to the guy that committed suicide. And so it's not just the guilt associated, they're shamed as a man that they weren't there for a brother. And they're shamed when a marriage breaks down, or I've even seen shame around how they couldn't help a spouse survive an illness, or they shamed that they should have driven in the snow. So, and it's like, okay, let's unpack that. It's pretty hard to unpack that level of guilt around, because it's not a tangible thing in some ways. It's just this odd association between random events that came together. And it's like, bro, like, it's freak. Like, why are you taking on that sense of shame and guilt over that then manifests into grief? And so then there's this cacophony of sound that's really difficult to help them break through to some sort of essence about, okay, let's just, as Ben said, there's this ongoing thing that is trying to be articulated. And it's just, I think it's challenging, for people, but particularly for guys.
Yeah, I think the shame piece is huge, man. Like, the word coward comes to mind. There's so many guys I've worked with where they've been a coward in that situation. Even when something, like you said, like, that's completely out of their control. There's always that, like, I could have, if only I was stronger, right? If only I was smarter, if only I did the right thing at the right time and threaded that needle, it would have been different.
This guy, his wife, on snow, a freak blizzard, an avalanche, and he didn't check the tires. So somehow he put all of this thing together with, I just failed as a man because I didn't check the tires. Okay, well, let's talk about an avalanche. Let's unpack that a little bit. Let's talk about freak weather and, a mess.
I mean, when I think about, what are the stereotypical things that men are, what are we known for, or what are we bad at? And the top of the list is identifying and expressing emotions in general. And I think I wrote about this a little bit in my blog post that whoever somebody is leading in. It's not as though grief happens to somebody who didn't exist before that time. I mean, it happens to a person who had a tendency to express and deal with their feelings in a certain way. And men in general in our culture tend to have patterns in which they deal with their feelings. And so the thing I see a lot is that it's just, since it involves so many strong feelings, if that enters into a person who's already bad at dealing with feelings, that it just totally scrambles and overwhelms the system, and it just sort of gives them this whole new, completely more intense experience than maybe they've ever have had to deal with before, into an already challenged system, an already challenged person, somebody whose relationships were already strained, or already had a hard time communicating what was happening inside them and feeling close to people in doing that. So, I guess that, I mean, there's probably a whole lot more than that maybe, Jack, you can that's what came to my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's intense, right? Like that's the key word. And I think some people who, like you said, are kind of in that, maybe not dysregulated, but approaching that, and then they get that mountain on top of them. It's just, a cacophony of noise, John, I think you put it as, which is a perfect way of putting it. And to be completely honest, even men, again, I'll specify, like, I'm thinking of a specific case, but I've seen several cases like this of people who do think that they're very in touch with their emotions, or do think that they can process things really well. And then all of a sudden something, grief related will happen, and it will suddenly be, oh, I'm taking care of everyone else in my life. I'm taking care of this person, deal with it. I'm taking care of that person, dealing with it. And then at some point we kind of get to the conversation of, well, how are you doing this? You have all these skills to be able to hold other people. That's great. But are you able to kind of hold these feelings of what's going on for yourself. So it's important to know that it's repression is not just I don't want to look at this. Sometimes it's I think I'm looking at this, but I'm actually looking at it through the lens of other people rather than my own experience.
Yeah, that was a really good thing. I want to build on that. Like this male role of like being the rock, of being the supporter, being the one that doesn't feel anything. If we do reference stages of grief, which I agree, Ben, are quite limited. I think, they were made like the 70s or something. We can probably do better. But I think as a useful tool, I see that as denial. Similar to John, what you're talking about, that cowardice, that shame thing is also denial, right? They're kind of two sides of the same coin. Either I don't feel anything because I'm the strongest man alive, right? Or I'm stuck in the shame hole and I'm denying that the loss ever happened. So I'm curious, like, how do you start to chip through either of those denial frameworks and get the man into feeling the loss, truly feeling the feeling rather than pushing it away?
This is a place, so I've had a lot of success relying on the process of what happened in the group for this, because I think sometimes one of the things that groups are great at is that, Mark, you know this because that's how we know each other, group world, is when you're with other people you identify with partially, but not entirely, you can work on yourself as they're talking. You don't actually have to talk about yourself. So somebody else can be sharing something, and you don't even have to put it into your own words. You'll have somebody in the other four other people in the group will have an emotional experience, or maybe they'll be talking about in a way that reminds them of their wife, and then they'll gain something from that. And so indirectly, I would say, and on top of that, it also, the way I run groups is I challenge people to use that time to get better at expressing themselves. And so over time, I'm looking for how are they reacting in a way that they might not be able to put words to, and then inviting them to just little by little try to talk about it. Oh, you seem to you sat back in your chair and pulled your hood over your head when so and so was talking. What was going on? Do you anything you want to share about that? And nope, I don't know what you're talking about. Like it might start there for a while, but it's just such a rich environment, and just being around other people. That's one thing that people who are grieving say all the time about being so alone with things. Even just that alone can have enough of a calming effect to open people up and start really doing things.
I think if I've got someone who's talking to me about it and it's sounding like it's coming over as shame or something, I try not to address their inability to articulate emotion, but I try and link an emotion somehow. And try and if it's starting at a shame conversation or a shame, or I feel guilty, man. And even though in my head are going, okay, well that's sheer craziness. I actually try and drill down into that word, and I find that they will actually fumble across a series of expressions. Because what I agree with what you're saying, Ben, is that people are coming to the party with a set. Now, men can talk about their emotions, so I believe they can talk about their emotions. They talk about it in a different set of ways, and if I can help a guy start where he is and take him to where he ultimately wants to be, is to have this free ranging conversation and be able to articulate things. I've found that a very helpful process. Because if I can let them fumble through, and I'd be really interested to see how that works in a group thing around grief. I've done group, but not around grief. I've done it around trauma for years now. And you're absolutely correct. That ability to be able to learn while someone else is speaking about something totally different, because we're all hearing what we need to hear. And what I find with that shame or the guilt thing, for just as an example, is if I can get them to drill down into that, they'll be fumbling through an articulation, and then they'll be in a totally different place. It's like, okay, we're here. Okay, well, let's start here and see what we can build forward. Randomness, man.
Well, it makes me think as you're talking, John, like grief needs a lot of space. I think it's like a very slow emotion. So it needs a ton of space.
I know I mentioned last time, I want to build off that if I can, Mark. Like last time, so my heritage is Australian Aboriginal Indigenous. And there's a place that we keep around a fire pit, which we talk about sitting on the ground. And often when the men, because we have women's business and men's business, so when we sit on the ground as men, often we're coming to these sacred times of songs and stories, and we're carrying things. And often it's what we would call grief in our world. And as you give room over a course of a night or days, it literally just evaporates. It's like a metaphysical thing that takes place, and you end up sharing each other's griefs as you sell stories. And by you're very articulate in that, Mark, by giving grief room to breathe, I think that'd be challenging in like a 1 hour session, because I've been in sessions with some of my brothers that are 2 and 3 days long, and we're sitting because an uncle's died, and we're sitting and we're telling stories and singing songs, and the young boys have got to learn the stories from the old boys because now it's their turn to remember those songs as we go forward. And so there's all this space, but it's space with purpose instead of just space for the sake. Oh, I've got to give myself space now. It's like I'm a guy. I'm spacing. Whatever the hell spacing is, it's like, but it's room with a purpose, and I think that's a very helpful thing culturally. It was a big learning curve for me when I started to learn that stuff.
I like room with a purpose. I think that's a helpful framework to use with guides, because I think this is maybe why people are drawn to the stages, is because it gives structure around something that feels so chaotic. But if we kind of just say, like, we can create room for whatever it might be, whatever your structure might be, group, I think, is a great place to build that, modeling, what that could look like for other people. But even just on one-on-one therapy, you yourself being able to kind of model and be like, that would make me sad, something as simple as that, and just seeing where that resonates with them, or if they even can like associate that's something that's on their radar. It is working through and pulling that thread. John talking about, okay, well, if there's shame, let's go with shame and then see what's underneath that. And usually we can get somewhere from there. But even sometimes it's been helpful to model loss as being something that's going to be forever. Grief is something that is short term. You will always experience the loss. You will feel the loss. It's not going to be what it feels like right now. And sometimes people are scared that this is just what they're going to feel like forever, because it feels so big and so life-changing. Yeah, it's something that it can be helpful for people to hear, of just saying, like, this is just right now, and it should be big right now. It won't always be. So if we were to kind of say, well, what's happening right now, knowing that this will pass in a certain way, what would be the emotions, or what would be the things that you would say you were feeling right now?
Room with a purpose. I like that. I'm gonna tell that to my group.
Steal it, mate. It's all yours now, Ben.
Yeah, it's out there now, John. So I mean, to that point about needing a lot of space. I mean, this group I've run has been ongoing for years, and there's not a whole lot of original members, but there's some, and there's people in there who've been there for multiple years. I don't think that even half the group has told the story about what it was like the day they found out they lost the person they lost, in a really detailed way. I don't push them to. I don't make them. When somebody new enters, I don't like make everybody go around like in some sort of orchestrated traumatic way, like, tell us about this most horrible
12
thing you've ever
steps, stand up.
experienced. Right, we're gonna pass
If
the
you're
talking
new here
stick.
today, you have to tell us why you're grieving.
We're gonna pass the trauma stick. Here, you take it.
Tell us about the worst day of your life now. Go.
Right? And they're terrified. I mean, whenever somebody enters who's new, they're terrified because there's this new situation. If they've talked about it or not, they're in a situation to have to, and it reflects how I think a lot of people feel in their day-to-day lives, where they may have not seen their ceramics instructor since they lost their part. Who the guy at the coffee shop who makes their coffee, or they meet somebody new and they say, so do you have any siblings? And you have to decide, how it's excruciating. Yeah, it's really excruciating. So yeah, endless space is how I.
That's such a good point too, because I wonder if that's what keeps people away sometimes from groups specifically, almost because it's their peers and they're worried, like, I'm gonna have to sit down and just rehash this with a bunch of strangers. One-on-one is difficult enough, but people can usually like grasp that. But that's not what it is. It isn't just everyone coming down and immediately just like trauma dumping on one another. And I think the more we can get that word around, the more group work might be able to get done.
It's a noble cause.
As you're speaking, I think there's a there's a hard truth in there that I just want to highlight, which is, I think Jackie put it really well, right? That like the grief is now, but the loss is forever, and that things will never go back to the way it is. I think that one really separates grief from like, I don't know, like a setback or a failure. It's like your life is irrevocably changed, either because you've lost that person or a relationship or an identity piece or, whatever it is, your health. So, I think I have clients that always come and ask me this question of like, when's it going to be over? They come in and feel like, when am I done with this? When's it going to be over? And I think, like you're saying, the hard truth is that the answer is like never, really. You really have to evolve and move on, or at the very least, endure. So I'm curious for each of you, when you talk about that kind of like long-term grief, how do you help men understand that, honor that? I know, John, you're talking about some ritual I think can be very important. But how do you help people live with that hole? Because it really doesn't go anywhere, and it gets triggered all the time.
If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us to reach more men and inspire them to become the best versions of themselves. Thank you for your support. And now back to the show.
A friend of mine lost his son 17 years ago. He was 28, 4 a.m. in the morning, out for a bike ride on I-35, whatever. Leave that alone. Anyway, a guy on crack ran him down, killed him. And so every year I've got it in my calendar. On the day of his death, to ring him and ask him, bring up his son. And I've actually found that what I've noticed after funerals, everyone leading up to the funeral go, yeah, Mary, 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 Mary. At the funeral, Mary, Mary, Mary. 3 days after the funeral, Mary, Mary, Mary. A week after, go Bulls. That's what it'll be. A month after, nothing whatsoever. And by the time you get to a month after, you've had the first day in church without them. You've had the first PTA event without them. Then you're coming up to the first quarter. Then you got all the yearly visits. So I've actually found it very helpful to name the person, mention the name, and keep that name alive, because, as we've all said, for them it's still ongoing. They're still lost that person. They're sitting across from an empty chair every night. And so for them, that person still smells in the house, smells in the pillows. And so for them, they're still alive. And I think helping keep that memory alive in a positive way. Hey, listen, I remember last time we went out with Mary and this happened. We had that, that horrible thing, and she spelt, lasagna all over it. It's the same old story, and you tell it all the time. But for them, they're reliving those things all the time anyway. And I found that a very positive way to make that distance and time a productive space instead of a crippling space.
I like that idea too of finding an idea of productivity around it too, of just like bringing them up, mentioning them is not just about pain or remembering the loss. It is about keeping a connection with this person, in some way, shape, or form. I talk a lot in my practice, and I wrote in my blog post about the idea of like leave-taking rituals, which I found is really beneficial for people to create a type of, we could call it closure to some degree with the idea of loss, or making a benchmark point of saying, this is something that has happened, and I'm creating, instead of just someone disappearing overnight, I'm creating something physical to represent that. But it isn't about taking leave of this person's memory or what they meant to you, or, anything to that point. That's going to be something that continues and is curative, but it usually is best handled, I've found, after like the acute grieving has gone by. Then we really start talking about, well, you're going to keep living with the memory of this person, and how do we make sure that that's something that's honorable, or how do you make sure that that's something that you want to connect with? Because sometimes after the grieving process, sometimes people do feel a little bit like it's almost better not to think about them, because then I don't have to experience any of those feelings anymore, and finally gotten over it. So it is about, reconnecting in some way and recalibrating for them what it is like to experience that. Because if you don't think about that person, they're going to come back up, the smell of the pillow, or someone laughs like they do, or you go to one of your spot, like that person is not gone from your life. That's just never going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think preparing people for that, and that's where like having contact with other people who have, had some experience with it. They can tell you about, here's here's what I went through. I've gleaned a lot from all the people I've worked with who've, lost several folks or at least a couple of folks, and I can then relay that to people who are new to the experience. But I like to shoot for the moon. I mean, in these experiences, I feel like it's such a jarring experience, especially, I mean, especially I don't want to compare grief, but I think there is a difference for something like a sudden and unexpected loss and a really horrific accident versus like, my 94-year-old grandma who has been 10-year decline into dementia. Like, they're not pleasant. I mean, there's lots of nuances to it, but somebody who's just going about their life and then one day their person is gone, that what that does to someone's nervous system. I mean, I'm a kind of a one-trick pony when it comes to therapy. I mean, I'm always coming back to what is somebody's ability to engage in meaningful relationships with other people and to feel connected to other people and to seek and actually experience being supported by people who they're close to. And and so if somebody's going to make it through the long haul of something like this, I feel like their emotional regulation, their own ability to take care of their emotions needs to be somewhat intact, but also their ability to lean on their community and to be close to people and to stay in touch with people and to tell the people in their lives, John, like, I want you to call me every year and on the anniversary, and actually engage with people, because that's the only thing I think that really helps. I mean, it's the loss. It shatters your relational system.
Yeah, that's good, Ben. That's really good, mate.
People are the only way out, I think.
Yeah, I'm hearing this theme of like, connection, right? Really being the antidote. And I'm, preaching to the choir. I think it's kind of trite. It's like we're more disconnected and isolated, especially as men, seemingly ever. When I think about ritual, I'm of Jewish descent, and we have the, sitting Shiva in my culture, where when somebody dies, basically you just shut your life down for about 2 weeks and you don't do anything. You just sit and you talk. And similar, John, what you're talking about, like you tell stories, you look at old photos, you just kind of remember that person. And the Jewish community at large comes and takes care of you. Like you leave your door unlocked, and the idea is that people come and they bring you food and they clean and they take care of everything. So all you have to do is just grieve. But we are so isolated. So I wonder, how do you connect when the impulse, I think, is to push away? I think a lot of men, we want to go to that man cave. We want to retreat, whether it be from shame or from a sense of failure. We want to like really push everybody away when we're in grief. How do you encourage guys to connect and to reach out in what is perhaps, kind of what you're saying, Ben, like the worst day of their life, right? I mean, the worst horrible thing that's ever happened to them.
People, and not just men, people are going to do that because that's sort of what they're used to doing. Maybe they had, neglectful families, and, maybe they had multiple traumas, throughout their lives. And that's just how they've become accustomed to dealing with, their own difficult emotions, is not seeking people out. And that, it's a tenuous endeavor. I mean, sometimes you can get by, but it often, when you're dealing with something, I think of this magnitude that rocks your world in this way, the people that end up in therapy, around these things, for a prolonged, who really aren't going anywhere with it, who it's not evolving, it's not progressing. I kind of feel like there's no other way around it. Like, so I try to just put it to them very simply, like this is, a thing that happened, but also these are probably, in order to get through this, you're gonna probably need to work with some things you've needed to work with for a really.
That's good, Ben. Yeah, that's good insight, mate.
There's no way to continue to do things as you were doing them before. You're not gonna make. People will say that to me. They'll say that unsolicited. Sometimes I can't. It's just not working anymore after this.
It comes back to being able to ask for what you need or ask for what you want. And I think that's hopefully a therapy skill that people develop over time. But if someone's coming to you specifically for grief or something like that, sometimes it is the process of holding that grief and learning how to ask for help. Maybe isn't the perfect way to do it, but to just advocate for yourself and kind of say, like, I'm having a hard time, or I'm letting myself fall apart a little bit, and I'm looking for other people to kind of hold me up a little bit. And what is that like to ask for? Because we're not socialized, anyone, usually, to ask for that.
Yeah, that reminds me, Jack, like I think I forget sometimes that by the time someone's called us, like they've gone through that whole process of like nervously searching Psychology Today and, sitting over their phone, and am I going to call, am I going to text or whatever, finally reach out. Like they've already done a lot that I think needs to be acknowledged, and maybe we can build off of.
And especially, I had someone who reached out and said, you're the third therapist that I called. And I was just like, what generally is happening? I don't want you to give me any details. What's going on a little bit? Because I could just hear in his voice, he's like, I don't want to go through this again with someone for like a 10, 15-minute conversation. And it can be, not to overuse this word, but it can be traumatizing over and over again to kind of go through and say, this is what's happening, this is what's happening, this is what's happening to people that you don't feel a great connection with yet, and to really be vulnerable and open yourself up. So not to keep harping on groups, which, you know what, I want to keep harping on groups because they are really helpful for this, but it's a good introduction into being able to go into that space and just kind of say, this doesn't need to be anything. This just can.
One thing I've found is to try and find bridge language. Like for the gym, for example, like you're not weak, you just need a spot, just try and find something that they can relate to. Man, we just got to get our sets in. So come on, let's go for a walk. Let's have a conversation. And I think we mentioned it last time. I love it with men. Women communicate face to face, men side by side. And often when I'm dealing with people on an individual basis, I won't do it in a therapeutic setting. I'll do it with a gym and breakfast, or I'll do it with a walk around the block, or I'll do it with a bike ride and then sit in the park. Because it's that activity of moving alongside each other, shoulder to shoulder, and then trying to find, not making it cliche, like life turns like a bicycle chain as we're riding along, and the path is bumpy. That reminds me, your daughter died yesterday. Yeah, it's a bit of a shame. And not like that, I've blundered through those conversations.
Don't do that
That was
one.
on me. Yeah, don't do that one. I am that guy. Awkward. But if I can find some way to connect with them on something that is, that's parallel to what their language is, then I find that's a lot easier way to be able to. It sort of short circuits things and gives me some language to be able to, that they understand. They know what a spot means. They what one more rep, man. You just got to go one more time. A lot of the veterans guys I talk to, it's always about getting up one more day, doing one more rep, one more chance. Okay, like today's dark, but promise me, I'm going to call you at 6:00 tomorrow. You're going to have to go to bed because you're going to have to face this demon. You just need to do one more rep, mate. Just do one more rep. I'll see you at breakfast. And that sort of puts it in a nomenclature that's applicable to them.
I think as we're talking, I'm curious about this unprocessed grief. I think we're sharing ways to process, whether from different cultures or through therapy or through group, things like that. But there's so many guys out there with unprocessed grief. I mean, I would say nearly half my caseload at this point is somebody who's lost a father, whether to death or divorce, and they had that grief, they had that loss that happened when they were young, and it was never held, it was never supported, nothing ever came of it, right? Where no one stepped in, right? No one stepped in to talk to them. And, you fast forward 10, 15 years, now this person has a drug addiction, or this person, struggles in their own relationships, or this person has a lot of self-sabotage or overeating, or, fear of talking to people, whatever it is, right? But it kind of comes out sideways. So I'm curious, like, one, do you all see that in the men that you talk to? If the grief doesn't get treated or held, whatever you want to use, how's it come out? And two, how do you help somebody go back to something that perhaps happened 15, 20 years ago?
I'll say, at least for substance use, when I do work, there usually is some form of grief, whether it be an actual like loss of a person, or a loss of a life, or, a partner, or, whatever it might be conceptually. It's difficult work because it often is containing the substance, managing the substance in and of itself as a coping strategy, and then discussing and creating other coping strategies around that, and then usually going into the grief, because once you bring it up, a lot of the times, you're going to want to go back to those coping strategies that have been working for you either to numb you out or to completely remove you. So it's slow work, but for the times that I've done it, it actually does help in the long run, because once it becomes less of a festering wound and more of just something that you can actually look at and hold and know it doesn't have to control your life, usually all across the board, symptoms remit regardless of what the concern is. So it's slower work. I don't want to say, slow can mean different things to different people, but I would say it's careful work to know that there's a process to it. It isn't just diving into the deep end immediately, and there's a reason for that. It's not because you're weak or you can't take it. It's simply because there aren't the structures there that, people in your life should have given you, when you're growing up and you don't have those structures to put into place. You're putting them in now. So framing it like that, I think has been helpful for at least the work that I do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good reminder, but I say with a lot of my substance use guys, it's like the drugs or alcohol worked, like they worked in the short term. Now there's, horrible consequences and knock-on effects, and it's time to get off them. But it's a good reminder that stuff was in place for a reason. And often that reason, like you're saying, is grief and trauma.
And it's so interesting to me, the parallels of usually when someone's at a point where they want to change their use or stop their use, the grieving is brought up because they're grieving the substance or what it was able to help them achieve or what it was coping with at a certain point. They're not grieving the horrible hangovers or, the what's happening now. It's grieving when it was good for them. The grief is brought up. And so there's a lot of parallels that come up in that way too, which is very interesting. Not to compare the loss of a substance to the loss of a person, but the idea of grief and loss and letting something go becomes really salient for them.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a specific way in which, substances are, gosh, they're so effective until they're not. But that's a way that people, if you're not able to talk about it, you don't have support from your family, you don't have the ability to process difficult emotional experiences. If people find some way of dealing with it, and that becomes just sort of what they do with it for a while. And so you add 10, 20, 30, 40 years onto that. And by the time somebody comes in at 55 and they're like, I can't keep drinking, and you're thinking about what happened 40 years ago. You can't, I feel like you have to work with whether it's drinking or whatever they're doing or whatever the effects are of however they've managed to deal with whatever they're dealing with. You have to kind of just start there. Like we're dealing with whatever, you're distant from your spouse, and you're cheating on your spouse because you really can't be close to anybody and you can't trust her or whatever it is, or your liver's going to fail because you've been drinking your way through this for. You have to just start where they are, I think, and then maybe in that process, you end up back to, how'd you get here? What were you doing? How'd you start? And if the pain or if it's not working anymore and it's really clear that it's not working anymore, I don't think anybody comes to do this by choice usually. I mean, usually you're forced to. Nobody wakes up and is like, I know what I want to do today. I'm going to go talk to Mark. I'm going to spill my guts. I'm going to tell him all that stuff I've been, not talking about for my entire life. It's kind of you have to have your hand forced, I think. And so I start with sort of how that is happening. And then I think that's where you stay. And, maybe it repeats itself a few times. Maybe they end up in detox a couple of times, before you actually get where you go. But it's, yeah, I totally agree. You can't just sort of turn back the clock, and nor a lot of people don't even know what it is. You ask them what happened. I don't know. Were your parents like, oh, my mom was a saint? Oh, was she? Which one, Mother Teresa? Who are we talking about?
I think maybe one of the challenges that guys have is that maybe they're not so concerned about avoiding feelings, but they're scared of failing at feeling because of failing at sharing their grief. And one thing I've found is if I can help them get micro wins, even if it's on one thing, even if it's and guys want process, they want tools to be able to fix this thing. And a very simple thing I give them is like 3 5s or 3 times 5. There's 3 things for 5 minutes a day. So say mindfulness, breath work, and I call it an authenticity check or an integrity check, which is to look inside. You've got 5 minutes to do it, no more. So you start with mindfulness, you do your breath work, which most guys are going, I hate this shit. I'm breathing, I'm being mindful. Okay. And then they get through all that. So they've wasted their first 10 minutes, which they come to appreciate in about 30 days' time. And then they come to this authenticity check. And it's like, now you've got 5 minutes, put a timer on. You've got 5 minutes to sit with And it's the concept of sitting with, preferably with your feet on the ground, no shoes or socks. Hard in Brooklyn, but your feet on the ground. So, okay, sit this. How are you actually feeling? And you've got only 5 minutes, and you got to. I'm feeling numb. Okay, that's a feeling. Numbness is a feeling. I'm feeling shame. Okay, that's good. I'm feeling nothing. Okay, nothing is actually still a feeling. It's the absence of. So you're feeling an absence of. So I found that by giving them those three things and limiting it to 15 minutes, because if I was to tell them to take half an hour or 2 days, they're going to be there with a bottle of Jameson or whatever it is. So just by doing that, and that's the only time all day they're allowed to think about their feelings. You can, and it's like, we're all the same, fellas. Like, you tell us not to. It's like, okay, that's the one thing I want to do. I want to process my emotions. Who the hell do you think I am telling me I can only feel for 5 minutes a day? It's like, okay, well, let's start there. Oh, you felt for 20. That's good. So I found those very helpful, because if I can get them out of the shame that comes with I've been told I don't deal with my feelings. I'm not processing because they kind of know that they're not. And so if I can help them avoid the failing at feeling, then I've found that effective.
Yeah, I really like that tool, and I think it dovetails really to my next question, which are there tools that you all can share with our listeners, or I use the word ritual. I do talk about a lot of that with MTO. Whether it be a big ritual, kind of John, what you're talking about, right, of like going in and being multiple days with only men, right, feet on the ground, sharing stories. That was a beautiful explanation. Or a micro ritual, which again, I guess is like your 3x5, right? Something that you can do in 15 minutes. But I think we need that as humans, because it is something that, Ben and Jack, you two were talking about. It's so overwhelming. Right? It's like it's a tidal wave. So without some kind of containment, or at least some compass and a map, or a set of tools, a set of anchors to climb this mountain, I think we do end up repressing it or avoiding it, right? Or denying it. So yeah, I'm curious if there's anything you want to share with our listeners of ritual, whether it be kind of a big macro thing, or a micro thing they can do in, 15 minutes that can really help them to process grief. And I want to just add a little, I think as, religion and stuff is declining in the West, we need these things more than ever, because that's what religion and faith did for people, is they provided these containers and these, rituals. But I think a lot of men don't have that now. So they're really flailing. In how to deal with these major life moments.
Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you wanted to open up, but you were afraid that it wouldn't be taken well? You ask yourself, what's the point? Nothing's going to change anyway. So you do what you always do. You push it down, numb out the pain with a drink, a night out, or pornography. I've been there myself, and I know that men lack the outlets for emotional expression, which is why I founded Men's Therapy Online, a healing hub for men's mental health. If you've been knocked on your ass or just crave meaningful connection, join Men's Therapy Online, a community of men who just get it. We offer individual therapy, men's groups, and powerful retreats, all led by licensed therapists. At Men's Therapy Online, we will help you to get back on your feet and take your life to the next level. Start your journey today at menstherapy.online.
Briefly talk about it again, because I already brought it up, but the idea of leave-taking rituals, an example of, one that people have really liked in the past and that I enjoy as well, is the idea of, writing a letter and burning it. There is something so cathartic in that action, and I think it's gotten a cheesy rep, sometimes, from this idea of then I'm not going to feel, quote unquote bad anymore, and I'll be released from all of this. And it really is structuring it around, well, the action of this is there is always so much you want to say. There's always things left unsaid, or things you wish you had said, or any of those things. Saying them in the therapy room, absolutely beneficial. Saying them in a space that is ritually just yours, where you were with your loved one or whoever you're mourning. There is something, I don't know, sacred might be too religious of a term, but there is something about having that connection and having that ability to release something and feel a release when you might feel emptiness or numb. Sometimes feeling anything can be, a joy. And I think that's, again, where drugs and alcohol can get a little bit convincing to some people, because they're like, oh, this is making me feel something, or whatever I'm feeling, it's numbing it out either way. But I love the idea of ritual. And again, writing a letter and burning it is one of so many. I really try to encourage clients to come up with their own that's specific either to them or the relationship or something that actually has meaning to them. But if nothing comes to mind, that's one that I really like to go with.
Hi, broken record here. I'm gonna, bring in the idea of group as a ritual also. I mean, I have my group. It's the same time every Wednesday. It has been for years. It will always be. And there's something about that people have said how powerful it is just to be able to orient around having a place every they know this is the time they're going to come and spend with themselves and spend with their loss and grief. And that by itself is, I think quite important. The other thing that came to mind was I used to do this, and Mark, you'll laugh because this is about as concrete and like tangible of advice as I'll ever get as a therapist. Clients out there are laughing too. Uh, I used to do some work with an organization called the Responder Alliance, and they're a nonprofit that has specifically worked with and works with groups and teams that are in high stress environments like backcountry search and rescue or ski patrols and things like that. And what they did was adapt. I thought it was hokey at first. It's like a color coded stress continuum from green to yellow to orange to red. And they adapted it from the military. And so this is, I think, very guy friendly, if you will, where and you're functioning in the green. It's really just a way of visualizing how you're doing, and I like it because if I had to give one sort of tangible thing that helps, I think it's getting really good at tracking yourself and knowing how you're doing day to day. If you wake up in a shitty place, like you're probably not going to go do that whatever complex task you had planned to do that day, and you should not even try. And so it's a matter of being able to, in a really tangible way, which I think is appropriate when you're in heightened emotional states, to be able to look at something very simple, like ski patrols, that go on, really gruesome accident recoveries and body recoveries, and there's a lot of deaths at ski resorts or something. Like probably every ski resort expects to experience a few deaths every year, and all those same patrollers are going to be the ones going on the body recovery. And so they have some of them, like up at Eldora here, I know that they have the stress continuum taped up onto the computer in the morning. The patrol director has it right there in front of him, and that they've sort of built it in as a cultural thing to learn to monitor themselves and each other so that they can respond appropriately. It's really like kind of a protocol of sorts for, if you're good, then you can do all these other things. And as you decrease in your functioning and the way that how you're affected, then at the very bottom, you're going to the hospital, and there's no questions asked, and that's planned for, and that's known, and that's accepted. But I like the stress continuum now. I don't think it's hokey anymore, because it just visualizes and gives people a way to start to orient around tracking themselves, just paying attention. Am I not so good? Am I horrible? Or somewhere in between. Yeah, it was a military thing, I think is where it originated.
It builds in that mindfulness, right? And it's like a quick thing, right? Just say one word. Hey, I'm red today. I'm orange today.
Red, yellow, orange. Yeah.
I do something similar with percentages for people going through loss. I always say, if you wake up, like, what percentage are you at? How much can you give to yourself today? It's like sometimes I'm at 30%, sometimes I'm at 80%. And then when they sit down with me, I'm like, how much are you here today? And we always kind of track it, because we say, well, 2 weeks ago you were 20% here. Today you're 70% here. What's changing, if anything? What are you doing? What's different? But I like the colors even better, actually, because I'm not a numbers guy.
For pilots, it's part of a checklist. The very last thing on your checklist before you get into the cockpit, you've done the whole plane, and you look at yourself, and you've got to make a same call. Am I capable of doing this? And if you've not, the FAA will tell you, like, you just cancel the flight. And I think that's self-awareness. But man, isn't that the thing? Being able to help people be self-aware enough to assess themselves and not just always go, I'm green to go.
Yeah, because I think there is the male pressure to be like, not just green, but super green, right? The greenest green there's ever green.
I'm greener than you, bro. You're orange.
Were you able to sleep last night?
Well, how many people after a loss go to work the next day, or just, say, try to go to normal functioning, which I understand. It's an attempt to keep normalcy, but it always boggles my mind when I
have to, or don't have a choice.
Or don't have a choice. Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, kind of as a final question to end on, maybe a hopeful note of people out there grieving, How often, or maybe is there a story that you all can share from your own life or from a life of a client, a community member, somebody where grief has been a real initiation for them? Because I've seen that in my practice, right? You have guys that, for better or for worse, ultimately for better, but grief cracks them open. It cracks them open to a depth of feeling and a depth of meaning, or even a spirituality that they never really had before, or it helps them create more meaning and more gratefulness and gratitude in their life. I think grief, if navigated well, if navigated, in community, if navigated through, a lens of meaning and a lens of honor, I think it can be a really transformative thing for a lot of men. So I'm curious, as I'm speaking, if there's any stories that come to mind around how someone can truly recover, and become initiated, right? Like grow into a quantum shift of a person.
I was lost in my thoughts there for a second because it was remembering, and this is all very fresh because I did the in-person retreat with my grief group on Wednesdays last week. And so we sat together for, I think it was a total of like 7 hours over a couple of days. And I don't want to single any of them out because I think they've all done, tremendous work. And it's sort of what I aspire to try to create in that group, that's sort of and I try to admit people who want and seem capable of doing that, and try to keep that as sort of cultural uh, expectation, because putting expectations on people. But it's so moving. There is a guy that comes to mind is was in recovery before his partner died, and had a moment where he could have. He was pretty fresh, I think, in recovery when his partner died. It was like a couple of months in, and he could have gone either way. And this is a while later now. It's really. And I put this in it was in my blog post too. He said, I wish. It's bittersweet, like he's done so much work and he's so proud of himself, but at the same time he said, I wish I could have done this while she was here. I wish I could have been this version of myself for her. Um, and so I don't want to put a wet blanket on the uplifting story that you were hoping that we would tell, but I also want to be realistic that, like, yes, the growth is if you're doing it well, it's not rainbows and sunshine. It's not like you found. I mean, if you really have done a thorough job with this, it will be a lot. It'll be real, and you'll be you. You won't be drunk and asleep with your face on a curb, but it's very meaningful. It can be very.
I'm with Ben. All my stories are miserable.
I tried. I was trying to come up with a happy one. That was the happy one.
I ain't got nothing either. I'm
John?
sitting here going, I'm gonna have to make some crap up, man. Because all of them have got the my life sucked, and then I lost this person that was the most important to me, and I had to turn my life around, and now my life doesn't suck, and now I'm looking for someone else to share my unsuck life with, but I'm really feeling guilty about the suck part. Okay, bro, I got nothing for you.
Well, I think that usually that's when we meet them, right? Is when they're in kind of this destructive pattern, and so it's nice when we get a success story in some ways. But I almost wonder though if there's something to kind of that bittersweet, maybe we could call it, kind of storyline, because I people experiencing loss don't necessarily want the happy ending, because that's just not authentic to how they're feeling. And I think sometimes towing that line for some people feels inauthentic, even though I know plenty of people who have told me stories of, like, this loss changed me for the better, and I feel like I've been able to live more authentically myself. But the idea might be that you become you, that you are still you, that this doesn't crack you open and leave that crack and nothing ever is the same again. Like, there is this story overarchingly here of many clients that I'm sure that we could bring forward to say the great resiliency that we possess, and that it isn't just about moving forward and putting your blinders on and being quote unquote strong, whatever that means. It is about these terrible things can happen, and we can come together as a community. We can retain ourselves and our identity. It is just about acknowledging that it is hard and that there is work involved. And sometimes, you're not in the green, and that's okay. And validating that and being more aware of yourself and learning mindfulness. Like, any one of these things individually, I would say would be a huge therapy success. You know, if you're able to be mindful, great. Really anything beyond that is just building upon that. So if a bittersweet success story is what we want, maybe it's just that, is that, you know, you will have this loss, but it will teach you more than it will take from you.
Man, he's smart, isn't he?
I love
Like,
that.
I wish I had that. I got
mean-
stuck with Ben's. It all sucks, and I wanted Jack's. You know what I mean?
Wait, I have a happy ending. No,
Dr.
I
John
thought of it.
King.
I
Yeah,
came
that's
up with
fantastic. Thank you, Jack.
it. No, I thought of it. It is happy. I was thinking, you know, as you're talking, Jack, you know, the group that I'm thinking of, these days, the conversation is as much about people getting back out and dating and the complications involved in it. And it's not all pretty. It's not all, it's real though. You know, they're thinking about, you know, how is this going to affect the, you know, the parents of my ex, you know, my ex-husband, or my husband who's now deceased. You know, all of the, how do I tell people? How do I feel about this? You know, how do I retain the memory of the person? Like, it's never rainbows and sunshine, but I love what you said about it, Jack, that you just get to be you. And that would be just a tremendous victory. You know, that's what you get. You get to continue to live. You get to continue to be you. And then you'll feel good about it sometimes, and sometimes you won't.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I mean, yeah, I agree. I don't think it's like a happy ending, you know, but it's a more real ending. That's what I'm hearing, right? It's a more real ending. It's a more authentic ending often. When I say to a lot of my guys about therapy, it's like, it's not designed to make you happy or actually even feel better. It's designed to make you feel more, to kind of like open up like the aperture in a camera and have like more feeling, you know, and be able to deal with it, be able to really ride those waves and understand them and relate with them and connect with them. So I'm hearing that with grief. I think that's what I've seen with my clients is guys who have started with a very narrow aperture, a very kind of being stuck in a box of any way, shape, or form, whether that be a substance or a gender identity or, you know, a loss, right? And then being able to really open up that and blossom into who they are, which includes actually more sadness, right? And more pain in some ways, but that pain is not avoided. It's embraced and at least dealt with and understood. So yeah, really enjoyed the conversation. You know, I feel like we definitely could have kept going. But as we're wrapping up here, if you can share a little bit about where people can learn more about you, find you online, and what services you can offer.
Yeah, my website is jacklambertlmhc.org. I'm Jack Knows Best on Instagram, and all of my information is in my blog post as well.
It's benjaminwhite.us. benjaminwhite.com was taken by some bloke in Australia. I tried.
So here we go. Yeah, it's my
He
fault.
emailed him. He never emailed me back.
Finally, we
so
get to the meat of the conversation.
I got
There we
I got stuck with .us. But benjaminwhite.us. I think there will be links to some of the other resources I mentioned, like the Responder Alliance and the American Alpine Club's Climbing Grief Fund. And you can find me on the website benjaminwhite.us.
drjohnaking.com. Same on social, same handle. And you can connect with us. We've got one thing going at the moment called the Mind Fight Challenge, which is it's a course that's normally $450, and it's given to everyone in men's therapy as a starting point for them to start to look at a performance mindset with overcoming trauma and grief. And so that's something we want to give away. And you can get all the information about the sort of things that we do. drjohnaking.com.
Yeah, fantastic. Check out all their stuff. And all of them are featured authors on our website. So menstherapy.online, you've heard them talk about the blogs. They'll have blogs up right now, posted. You can see their author profile pages. Read all their links and stuff are all there. So check out their writings if you want more of them. And I'm sure it's not the last time you're going to hear their voices on our podcast and on our roundtables. As for us, we're Men's Therapy Online. Everything that we have is at menstherapy.online. We offer individual, couples, retreats, groups. We're a one-stop shop for men's mental health, and we have tons of podcast episodes, blogs, and resources. A lot of stuff on there is free. We're trying to just really